Thank you, Hannah. Yes, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my journey in creating this new work about women. I suppose I believe that individuals can make a difference, you know, that each one of us in our own way can do something to affect an issue that we feel strongly about. And I got to the point where, just as a woman and as a human being, I just couldn't tolerate opening newspapers anymore and reading stories of rape, abuse, violence against women. You know, I was sickened and couldn't bear it, and it didn't seem to be getting less in the world, it seemed to be getting more. And so I thought, what can I do? And aside from, you know, giving some money to some organisations that might help victims of rape, etc., which I try to do anyway, but I thought, okay, I'm going to use my skills as a theatre maker, and I'm going to make a work about this subject which will hopefully bring it to the fore and provoke discussion and debate about it. So I set about trying to find some women who had, you know, been abused and who might like to share their stories with me. And I went, you know, like when you start a new work of art, you're really starting from not knowing, you know, you've no idea how you're going to do it. But so the first way I started was to go and visit a couple of organisations that I knew dealt with, there's an organisation in Sydney called STARTS, which deals with victims of torture and trauma. They try to do their counselling service that try and rehabilitate people. So I asked them if they might know any women that would like to share their stories with me. And I went to Australia for UNHCR, you know, the UN, and to see if they knew any refugee women that might like to talk to me. And so that's how I began. I think 2010, I started this journey. And Aminata, who you see standing there, was one of the first women I met, in fact, through the UNHCR, and who agreed to share her story with me. And I found 4 women. I mean, they were the first 4 women I found, you know, who said they would like to share their stories. And so I had quite a in-depth process of interviewing these women over extended periods of time. I probably did about 4 to 6 hours of interviews with them, and each of them told me things that they said they had never been able to really talk about before with anybody, because it's difficult, you know, there's cultural issues around talking about these things in various communities, as you'd be aware, and it's difficult to hurt family and talk about it. So somehow it was easier for them to talk to a stranger. And as I got to know these women, I thought I just became incredibly inspired by them. You know, I just thought, my God, they've been through hell and back, and, you know, look at these women. And I just became convinced that I would like these women to be involved, to perform in the show if they wanted to be involved in the making of the show. I'd never done anything like that before. I've always worked with professional actors, and I put together a group that was a mix of about half and half professional. Well, it turned out that all the women I met were African, and I didn't start with that intention. I thought maybe I might have an Afghan woman or a woman from Africa or a woman from Serbia or whatever, but I went with the flow, you know. It's just sort of serendipity, and these women and their stories were very strong and powerful, and so these were the women I was working with. And so the other professional performers I got involved were African actors and dancers and singers. And we started a very long, slow development process that began with workshopping. Of course, these women all had lives of their own. They weren't professional artists to work with. And so I could only work 1 evening a week in a hall in Western Sydney, which is where a lot of the kind of migrant and refugee communities live. And we started workshopping, and we started sharing these stories, and of course they were incredibly difficult to talk about and distressing, and in the early days there was a lot of tears, you know, a lot of pain, and we found ways of trying to help and deal with the pain and support each other. And you know, we had drumming. I knew that we needed physical activities, and so, you know, sometimes we'd spend an hour with one of the women's story, and then we get into some group singing or drumming or dancing, things like that enabled us all to kind of leave the space in a way that we felt okay and that we could. We also had the support of a counsellor who I could draw on to be there with the women. Anyway, over a long period of time, and I for a very long time I didn't know how I was going to make this work, what it would be, whether the women were capable of being in it, what sort of skills they might have. And I worked with a movement person, and we taught acting skills, and we started to improvise scenes from their life. And I wanted, I guess as the journey was going on, I started to see what this could be about. I saw that it wasn't, I wanted to be so much more than just 4 individual women's stories, because it really was about whole communities of women, and it was about trying to discover what there was in the cultures that allowed these things to happen. And all of them had felt they couldn't talk about this. There's a cone of silence around it. And I wanted to know who enforces this silence. Why can't we talk about it? What would be at stake? And these issues were explored, as well as I was also very careful, very much didn't want people coming out of there thinking, my God, this only happens in Africa, and how dreadful African men might be, and it must be a terrible place. So I explored with the women what were the wonderful things about their life at home, what were the things they missed, what were the great pleasures. And so we had, and right from the beginning, the women, although, as I said, not professional artists, were very savvy, and they said there's got to be a lot of humour in this, because, who's going to want to sit through it? And so we explored jokes, and comedy, and a lot of dancing, and there was a lot of joy in the whole process. And I saw that subtextually what was happening was that although the stories we were talking about, were terrible stories of betrayal and abuse and dysfunctional communities, but what we were beginning to create amongst us was a real sense of women healing women, and a really functional community of women. And the audience would read that on stage as much as they would read the other layer. So it took about, I think the sort of wonderful thing about this was that it was able to be a long, slow process. I was just doing it as an independent artist. I wasn't initially attached to any theatre company. I kept saying to them, I have no idea whether I'll be able to get this up or get funding or what, but at a certain stage I have no idea how it's going to all fit together, but it reveals itself to you as you go along. That is the artistic process, and I've come to trust that over 3 decades of work. And so we would meet for 3 months, 1 evening a week. We'd have big gaps in which I'd go away and write scenes based on what had come up, and then we'd come back next time. We'd try out these ideas, we'd try these scenes, we'd ask questions and explore more material and so on. And eventually, we did a workshop presentation to the industry after we'd been working for about a year, and I showed about 40 minutes of material that was still in a fairly rough form, and it was a result of that theatre companies got interested and said, no, we'd like you to properly develop this show and do it. And then about a year later, we were on stage, and we premiered it at a theatre in Western Sydney, which is where we wanted to start it so that we could have the people from those communities coming. And then later on we transferred into another theatre in the city, and we had a 5-week season there. And it's had a huge impact. I mean, we had, dare I say it, standing ovations at every performance, but we had so many women coming up to the actors afterwards saying, this happened to me, and thank God you're talking about it, and what can I do, and where can I go? And all of the women, even though it was a very, as you can imagine, a very painful thing for them to do, and I had to explore ways of doing it that did not re-traumatize them every night. They did not involve them telling the worst parts of their story. And I did that, again, I just discovered it as I went along, but it turned out to be quite different for each woman in the way that I approached it. And that's where I used the other actors, and I used video and all sorts of other components. So the women came in and out of telling their own stories, but you knew, whose stories we were talking about. And that's it. And now we're hoping to tour it. We're hoping to bring it to the UK next year. And we've also been offered a season at the Sydney Opera House, which is exciting. So from starting it, in a very small space, it's people are seeing that this is an important work, and it really, really gets people talking and brings the subject out. So I'd just like to show you a 5-minute piece, which I guess is a bit like a trailer. It's some clips I've just put together, and the whole piece is about an hour, 35, 40 minutes. But
I love my neck because it was never touched. I love my eyes and ears because they tell me where is danger. And my legs, they were strong. They could run me away.
This heart I cannot touch.
Once there was a young woman in blue, too beautiful for her own good, they say. So she was pulled down from her tower and dragged screaming through the mud. Meet Aminata, Rosemary, Yari, and Yoni.
I want to sing and write songs about the courage of my sisters and about the pain in their hearts.
I want my innocence back. I want my innocence back. You, yes you. You think you only took little? In reality, you took so much. My childhood was forced out of me, and then you just walk away free.
Because Aminata was the most beautiful girl in her class, all her friends used to joke, "When the rebels come to Freetown, you'll be the first they'll take." And they did.
I can't bear to look at him. I can't bear him touching me. At night, eyes wide open, I can never sleep. I start pretending I'm sick so he won't touch me. Sometimes I rub this stuff like a mint into my eyes to make them look strange and tearful. Anything to keep him away. Sometimes I try to take my own life.
I don't get it. How can a child be so unwanted? Why is it? What did I do? Is it there's something born in me?
I don't know how to say it. It's not just the sexual abuse, but the violence, the beatings.
November 11th. Let's talk about that. That was the best day for me. November 11th, 2004, I arrived in Australia.
2 men wanted to marry me,
Hey, what cake?
but I chose the wrong one. Still picked me.
All men want that one. She big woman.
Oh yes, all men like me because I'm round and juicy like a watermelon.
Hey, my sisters. Hey, did you hear about my neighbor, Mariama, who is having her 15th child?
15 child?
Yes, now. Her breasts are so long. She can breastfeed over her shoulder.
Now the Congolese are always dancing with an imaginary ball. Throw and catch.
We seem a close community, but I felt everyone let me down. Up to now, nobody ever talks about it.
Bad things happen. They just happen. There'll be no justice, so just forget about it. Move on. Move on.
Whatever happened to you, it just happened. You're alive, aren't you? And you're not the only one. So don't think about it.
Don't think about it. Don't talk about it.
Forget about it.
Don't forget about it.
Move on.
And this counselor, she said to me, you know, what they took from you is a song.
They took your soul. And I was thinking, what is the soul? Is it something I can get back?
Sorry, the sound's going, but the image has stopped, so we're in the wrong spot. Lost the image, sorry.